This lecture is on Chapter 23, the digestive system. The digestive system is called the alimentary canal or gastrointestinal tract, also abbreviated the GI tract, and it is a muscular tube that travels from the mouth to the anus. Digestion includes both physical and chemical processes that reduce food into soluble molecules that can be absorbed into the bloodstream. The functions of the digestive system include ingesting food, breaking down food into small molecules, absorbing nutrient molecules such as carbohydrates, and eliminating non-digestible wastes. This illustration shows the digestive tract organs in the right side of the table: the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus. And then the accessory organs on the left side column: the salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas. So we'll talk about all these through the course of today's lecture. The wall of the digestive tract is a mucous membrane layer called a mucosa, and it is a layer of epithelium that lines the lumen. The lumen is that empty space, if you would, in the GI tract. The glandular epithelial cells secrete digestive enzymes, and the goblet cells secrete mucus. There's also a submucosal layer called the submucosa, and it is loose connective tissue and contains blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. Pire patches are scattered throughout the submucosa of the small intestine. They are a part of the immune system. This illustration shows the mucosal layer here, lined by, in this case, it looks kind of like villi to me. I see little fingers there. Then we have the submucosa, that loose connective tissue. It's like areolar connective tissue, if you would. Here we can see the lumen, that space that is in the digestive canal. There, of course, is your mucosa, your submucosa, etc. And you can also see that there's layers of smooth muscle that are surrounding the mucosa, and then we see the serous membranes. That would be like the peritoneum and the intestines, etc. All right, so let's travel through it. Let's start with the mouth, the oral cavity. It includes the tongue, the palate, and the cheek. The tongue is composed of skeletal muscle. The palate separates the oral cavity from the nasal cavities, and it includes the hard palate and the soft palate. The hard palate is composed of the maxilla and palatine bones, and the soft palate ends in the uvula. The cheek will form the side cavities of the oral cavity. We have salivary glands, which are going to secrete saliva. So the saliva is a solution of mucus and water, and it will be secreted by the parotid, sublingual, and submandibular salivary glands. Where you'll find the parotid glands are anterior to the ears, the sublingual glands are under the tongue, and the submandibular glands are under the mandible. Saliva is that solution of mucus and water, and it contains salivary amylase, which begins the process of digesting carbohydrates. It also moistens food and prepares it for swallowing. It also has an antibacterial lysozyme that will secrete and along with secretory antibodies. So we need some first lines of defense, with the pathogens that we're ingesting along with our food and beverage and air. This illustration shows the hard palate. And notice that the maxilla is going to be where there are teeth, because the maxilla is the upper jaw. And the palatine bone will be posterior to the maxilla. And then the soft palate will not have a bone necessarily over it, but it will end there in the uvula. And we can see some of the tonsils pictured here. The pharynx is the throat, and it's the passageway for food and air, and it has three parts: the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The nasopharynx will contain air only, the oropharynx contains food and air, and the laryngopharynx is food only. The tonsils are the palatine, lingual, pharyngeal, and then if we have tonsillitis, that's the inflammation of the tonsils. And a tonsillectomy is the surgical removal of the tonsils, and that's if you have repetitive tonsillitis. This illustration shows again the hard palate, soft palate, and then we can see swallowing with that food bolus and how it needs to travel uh, from the oropharynx into the esophagus. We definitely don't want it to go to the laryngopharynx where we can see the laryngopharynx, sorry, is food only, and we want it to be the passageway from the oropharynx into the esophagus. We do not want food to enter from the laryngopharynx into the trachea. That's where the airway is. So the epiglottis will close as we swallow. It's neat. You can put your hand on your trachea and swallow, and you can feel the larynx of your trachea moving superiorly. And as it does that, it's closing that epiglottis down so the bolus can slide behind it down the esophagus. So swallowing begins with the voluntary phase. It's a reflex action once food or drink is pushed back to the oropharynx towards the esophagus. The bolus is chewed and swallowed food or drink. It kind of makes this little mush, this ball of deliciousness that you then swallow into your digestive tract. So the esophagus is the muscular tube that connects the pharynx to the stomach. The function is to transport food to the stomach. No chemical digestion occurs here. It's transport only. Peristalsis is the rhythmic contraction of smooth muscle, which pushes food along the alimentary canal towards the stomach. There's a lower esophageal sphincter, which marks the entrance to the stomach. It's not a true sphincter, but it keeps the stomach contents in the stomach. And if you have acid reflux, that occurs when the sphincter malfunctions, and GERD is the chronic acid reflux condition. Here we see an illustration of peristalsis. And so I imagine you're pushing something kind of through a tube. Like if you think about it, if you ever ate those freeze pops that are like the sticks, and you have to kind of push the ice of the pop upwards so you can get it, to eat it. That's pushing motion where you're clasping your fingers against that tube that contains the freezer pop, and then you're moving your fingers upwards, pushing that freezer pop upwards so you can eat it. That's going to be like what peristalsis does. It's basically sliding, pushing that bolus. And in this case, of course, it's not pushing it upwards, it's pushing it downwards towards the stomach. So the stomach has several functions. It stores and liquefies food. It starts the digestion of proteins, and it moves food into the small intestines. So for the digestive functions of the food, it acts on food both chemically and physically. So the muscular wall will churn and mix foods with the gastric juice. So the churning of the muscular wall is the physical part, the mechanical action, and then the gastric juice will be the chemical action. So there are gastric pits that lead to gastric glands, and they produce gastric juice, which is containing pepsinogen, hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor, and mucus. Pepsinogen is going to work on your proteins, as will hydrochloric acid, and it'll break down all the other chemicals too. An intrinsic factor is going to help you digest your B vitamins, and then of course mucus protects the gastric lining from the hydrochloric acids. All right, so here we can see that gastric cells contain 4 different types of secretory cells. So the chief cells will secrete that pepsinogen, which will digest those proteins when exposed to hydrochloric acid. The parietal cells will secrete the hydrochloric acid, which as you can see has a pH of 2. They also will secrete intrinsic factor, which is needed to absorb that vitamin B12. So if deficient, pernicious anemia can result, which is low iron in your blood cells. and a low blood cell count. Other digestive cells are going to be the enteroendocrine cells, which will secrete gastrin, which regulates muscular contraction and the secretions of the stomach. We have mucus cells, which will secrete a thick layer of mucus that protects the walls of the stomach. Bicarbonate in the mucus neutralizes gastric acid near the epithelial lining. Alcohol and water are absorbed through the stomach wall, but no other nutrients. Churned food and gastric juice mixture is called chyme, which exit the stomach in 2 to 6 hours. Chyme exits the pyloric valve in small squirts containing about 3 milliliters of material. More than 3 milliliters of chyme would overwhelm the buffer system of the duodenum of the small intestine. And so we talked about bicarbonate ion in the previous slide. So that'll be secreted there as well to neutralize the acids as they are entering your intestines. So here we can see the lower gastroesophageal sphincter, the one that we also call that like the cardiac sphincter. It prevents acid reflux. Notice that there are 3 layers of muscles in the stomach wall. We see a longitudinal layer, we see a circular layer, and then we see an oblique layer. And so they are going to churn the food. The rugae are going to increase the surface area. And we can see the parietal cells, we can see the chief cells, and we can see the mucus cells in here. And then this is an illustration of a gastric gland with the gastric pit. So the small intestine is the major organ of digestion and absorption. It extends from the pyloric valve of the stomach to the ileocecal valve where it joins the large intestines, which is about 18 feet long in a cadaver. The duodenum is the initial region of the small intestine, followed by the jejunum and the ileum. So the duodenum is going to be named because it's like, 12 inches, something like that, and it has many folds and villi, and the glands will secrete the mucus, they will receive pancreatic secretions and bile, and they will neutralize gastric juice with bicarbonate ion. The jejunum is going to continue the digestion. Ileum is the long segment of the small intestine, and it has Peyer's patches with few folds and villi that function in the immune system. So here we see the duodenum, so it's the first segment that leads then to the jejunum, followed by the long segment, which is the ileum. The walls of the small intestine are modified to greatly increase surface area. We've got circular folds, villi, microvilli. Circular folds are permanent transverse folds. Villi are finger-like projections that contain blood capillaries and lacteals, which are going to be lymphatic capillaries. And then microvilli are microscopic extensions of the columnar cells, and they are called the brush border. You can see why they're called the brush border because of their texture. And so we have the villi, which are going to be the finger-like, and then the microvilli on the villi. So even those villi that you see there are going to have that brush border on it. All right, functions of the small intestine include the digestion of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates into soluble molecules. Bile and pancreatic enzymes will enter the duodenum for chemical digestion. Bile is made by the liver and is stored in the gallbladder. It emulsifies, aka disperses fat, and intestinal enzymes complete chemical digestion. The small intestine will absorb nutrients such as sugars and amino acids, and the process of absorption is when they actually enter the blood. So sugars and amino acids will directly enter the blood, and then glycerol and fatty acids will enter the lacteal duct first, going through the lymphatic system before it's then put into the bloodstream. Movement of non-digested remains go to the large intestine. And then we have segmentation and peristalsis occurring. Segmentation is going to be, instead of like the circular muscles contracting and moving, pinching that food along, like I mentioned with the freezer pop, that's what peristalsis does. Segmentation is going to be more like a chewing. It's going to kind of be right there in that area. So as the peristalsis is moving the chyme through, the segmentation, I think of it like chewing. It actually mixes the chyme with the intestinal secretions. All right, so the small intestine also is going to have regulation of contraction and secretion through the central nervous system and the enteric nervous system. So the central nervous system will allow the response to hunger signals. So a lot of that's going to happen in the hypothalamus, and it's hormonal, etc. And the enteric nervous system is going to be a network of nerves within the walls of the GI tract that controls its own movements and secretions. The autonomic nervous system is going to contain the parasympathetic division and the sympathetic division. If you recall, the parasympathetic division is the major controller of digestive activities. It, speeds them up, and then the sympathetic division will slow them down. The large intestine has a large diameter but is shorter than the small intestine, and that trips a lot of students up. So it's the diameter that makes it the large intestine, not the length. It contains the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal, and its functions include absorbing water, salts, and some vitamins. It stores undigested material until it is eliminated. So here we see the ascending colon going from the um, intestines superiorly towards the transverse colon, which will go horizontally across the abdomen. And then we have the descending colon, which will travel down to the sigmoid colon, which is an S shape. That's what sigmoid means. Into the rectum, then, which will, store that undigested fecal matter. Excuse me. And then the anal canal when it is time to defecate. All right, so we have accessory organs. Oh, and before we move on to that, with the sphincters, we had already talked about that. But here in the anal canal will be a couple of sphincters. There's an involuntary and a voluntary. So the involuntary will open up, of course, and start letting the fecal matter through. And then the voluntary, which is a skeletal muscle, will be able to hold that in if, of course, you're not at an appropriate time and place to go and finish the process. Incontinence is the failure of those sphincters. And there's urinary incontinence for the sphincters of the meatus, that lead from the bladder to the urethra. And so that's urinary incontinence. And then, bowel incontinence is going to be a failure of those bowel sphincters. All right, so now we can go on to the pancreas, the accessory organs. So the pancreas is a dual functioning organ. It's got an endocrine function and an exocrine function. The endocrine function is when the pancreatic islets secrete insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. And then the exocrine function occurs when the pancreatic acinar cells produce pancreatic juice, which is secreted into two ducts, which empty into the duodenum. It's secreted into the pancreatic duct and the accessory pancreatic duct. And of course, that will contain digestive enzymes, bicarbonate, all that good stuff we've talked about. All right, so here we see a picture of the pancreas, and we can see pancreatic juice going into the pancreatic duct and the accessory pancreatic duct. We can see the exocrine cells are digestive enzyme secreting cells, and we can see the endocrine cells are the hormonal secreting cells. All right, so let's talk about that pancreatic juice. So we're going to talk about that bicarbonate and the digestive enzymes. So the sodium bicarbonate is used to neutralize acidic chyme coming out of the stomach. Remember, there's like 3 milliliters of chyme coming out at a time, and that is so as not to overwhelm the bicarbonate and the neutralization of the acid. Remember, HCl, hydrochloric acid, is like a pH of 2. It's very acidic. And so the digestive enzymes are going to include amylase, trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase, which is going to help to digest starches and proteins. And then we have lipase, which will digest fat, and the nucleases, which will break down nucleic acids. So amylase is the one that will digest the starch. And then for the protein digesting ones, those are going to be trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Trypsin is activated by enterokinase, chymotrypsin, um, and then carboxypeptidase, it says, is activated by trypsin. And then the lipase will be what digests fat, and the nucleases will break down nucleic acids. All right, so continuing on with accessory organs, moving to the liver. So the liver has two main lobes, a right and a left, separated by the falciform ligament. Each lobe is then divided into many hepatic lobules, which contain hepatic cells, hepatic sinusoids, and Kupffer cells, which are phagocytic or phagocytic macrophages. The functions of the liver include detoxifying blood, removing and storing nutrients, storing iron and vitamins A, D, E, and K. Those are your fat soluble vitamins. And then they make plasma proteins. The liver will also maintain blood glucose concentrations. Insulin will induce the liver to store glucose as glycogen. Um, Glucagon induces the liver to break glycogen down into glucose, and then the liver will make new, that says new, not mu, new glucose from other molecules, and that's called gluconeogenesis. So glycogenesis is when the insulin induces the liver to store glucose as glycogen, so glycogenesis. Glycogenolysis, sorry for the pronunciations. Glycogenolysis is going to be when glucagon induces the liver to break glycogen down into glucose. And then gluconeogenesis, I've got that one down, is when the liver makes new glucose from other molecules and like fats, things like that. All right, so liver also produces urea after breaking down amino acids, and it forms and secretes bile. So bile contains bilirubin from the breakdown of hemoglobin, and that gives urine its yellow color. Bile also contains bile salts, which emulsify fats, which means they break fats into smaller pieces so lipase can digest them. The liver also helps to regulate blood cholesterol level. So here we can see the right lobe and the left lobe, and then the falciform ligament that separates the two. We can see the gallbladder, which is inferior to the liver, and it stores that bile. Here we can see all the different type of lobules and the cells that are going to be contained within. All right, so the gallbladder, it's the sac on the inferior surface of the liver that stores and concentrates excess bile. When needed, bile leaves the gallbladder via the cystic duct. The cystic duct joins the common hepatic duct to form the common bile duct that enters the duodenum with the pancreatic duct. So the function of bile salts is that emulsification of fats. It also enhances the absorption of fatty acids, cholesterol, and fat-soluble vitamins. Gallstones occur when bile salts crystallize in the bile, and this can block bile ducts and cause obstructive jaundice. Here we see a table that shows the major digestive enzymes. We can see carbohydrate digesting enzymes include salivary amylase, pancreatic amylase, and then we have maltase, sucrase, and lactase. Maltase is going to work on maltose. Sucrase works on sucrose, which is like your fruit sugar and table sugar. Maltose is going to be more like bread, sugar, beer sugar, things like that. Lactase is milk sugar, so your lactose. Or lactase will digest milk sugar, which is your lactose. And then the amylase, as you can see, is going to break down starch, which we eat a lot of that because that's all of our rice, potatoes, wheat, etc. Then we see protein digesting enzymes. pepsin, trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase, and peptidases. So we see that pepsin is going to take the proteins and digest them into peptides, etc. Most of them are going to be digesting these peptides then into smaller peptides and amino acids, which then, of course, those can enter the blood. So carbohydrates and proteins can enter the blood, but the lipase, which breaks down the fatty acids into fat droplets and glycerol and fatty acids, that has to go into the lacteal. So it goes through the lymphatic system first. And then we see the nucleic acid digesting enzymes like nucleases, phosphatases, and nucleosidase, which will break down the RNA and DNA into nucleotides, or the nucleotides into nucleosides and phosphates, or the nucleosides into bases and sugars, so that we can digest all of those and utilize them as needed. All right, so 5 simple tips for good gut health. Probiotics, so eat the yogurts and fermented fruits and beverages that are rich in probiotics because they balance gut-friendly bacteria and prevent digestive disorders. We want to add variety, so a rich array of wholesome foods from all the food groups. They help regulate good gut health. They feed those healthy bacteria as well. Prebiotics, these are going to help enhance your immune system and enhance your probiotics. So those are going to be like onions, bananas, almonds, chickpeas. They are going to all contain prebiotics, chicory root fibers, etc. Those are prebiotics. Be careful with those though, because if you are sensitive to them, they can affect, gas, etc. Um, Portion size, that's one I'm still working on. We want to remain from overeating. I am a fan of overeating, but it doesn't make me feel good and it affects my digestion. So I've got to really get better about that. The others I'm doing pretty good on probiotics, variety, and then I love fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So I get a lot of fiber rich foods as well. So, look at this roadmap for good gut health and see where your pitfalls are. My pitfall is the portion size. So I'm going to work on that. I'm inspired now. All right. Well, thank you for listening.